Welcome to this Getting Ready to Assess Bite-Size session for the T-Level in Accounting, looking at the lead examiner report for the core components. The lead examiner's report is a really useful document that can help to inform your planning, your assessment, and to help prepare students for their external assessments on the T-Level in Accounting. There is a lead examiner report that is prepared for each of the core exams. So there'll be a lead examiner report for core paper 1, a lead examiner report for core paper 2, and then there's also a lead examiner report for the employer set project and a lead examiner report for the occupational specialism. So within these reports, they're really useful for giving an excellent resource for teaching. So within them, they show you what the cohort has been doing, but the lead examiner also will include examples of good questions, so how students have answered questions well. They might also include examples of misconceptions where students have misunderstood the question, so that you can then have a look at that and see where the student's gone wrong, and can use that to inform the students that are coming in future cohorts, or even those students, on how to improve their assessment approach. The lead examiner report provides feedback on performance, question by question or task by task if it's the projects. So you can have a look at each specific question. So if you've gone and looked at, say, Results Plus, and there's a specific question that students have underperformed on in your centre, you can go and have a look at the lead examiner report and see if that is a cohort specific thing for your centre, if that's a cohort specific thing across the country. So it gives you that ability to really drill down, have a look and see what's gone on, and then provide support to students to develop their assessment practice in that area. They obviously also provide some good examples of real student responses. So if you need WAGOLs, for example, what a good one looks like to share on the walls, or if you're producing booklets for students of what good ones look like, it's really good for that. But they've also include some that don't perform as well. And they're really useful if you're doing, say, be the examiner activities where you're giving them past answers and asking students to use the mark scheme to identify how they would improve it, so that then they obviously understand how assessment works, so that they know what they're doing when they're sitting down for their core papers and looking at the questions. So they can look at the question stem and know what they've got to do because they've seen past examples of questions and they know how to structure it. So it's really useful for that. The lead examiner's report also has tips for improvement. So they'll in addition to things of what students have done well, they'll also provide hints and tips either for each question or at the end in a summary of what centres can do or students can do to better prepare for each of the assessments that they're going to do on the T-level. And obviously there's some general guidance in there on how to answer the questions. We're going to have a look now at the different lead examiner reports for the core papers and the employer set project to see what we can use them for and how useful they can be. You can see here, this is the lead examiner report from core paper 1 from the summer 2024 series. And this is the introduction. So this is how the lead examiner report starts out. You can see that it tells you what paper it is. You can see that it tells you what the core component consists of, so the 2 core papers and the employer set project. And you can also see that in that assessment window specifically, 295 students sat the paper. So if you're using Results Plus, you're able then to understand the size of the cohort and maybe how your cohort are performing within that. The lead examiner report then goes on to explain which elements have been assessed on this paper. And then obviously it talks about the structure of the paper, how many marks are available, which was 90. But this also will then tell you the lowest mark achieved, which was 4, and the highest mark that was achieved was 62 in that exam series. So it gives you a nice range. So you can see where your students are sitting. And obviously sometimes students like to see where they've sat within the cohort as a whole. So for those students, they can obviously also identify where they may well have sat within that range. And it obviously shows you that the mean score for the summer 24 series was 32.7 and a standard deviation of 9.59. So you've got a lot of information there that probably is not so much relevant to students. It might be useful to you, but in terms of looking at the highest and lowest scores and planning for assessment, you've got that there. The next thing it says, obviously, there is you've got the paper 2 one on there. And that one has said that obviously that was the second sitting. There were 295 students that sat that one. The marks available were 93 on that one. The lowest mark achieved was 3 and the highest was 73. And again, that core paper 2 goes through and highlights all the same information. I just haven't stuck it here because it would have overloaded the slide, but they are on the website. You can go and get them. So you can see that it provides that useful information. You can tell where your students are doing. So if you've got a cohort that are achieving, say, 50 and below, that maybe you can look at where that you could improve to sit them. If you've got students who are achieving across the grade bounds, you know that they're achieving within what we were expecting for the cohort. So it's really useful for sort of benchmarking and things like that. Into the lead examiner report for the core exams, then you can see what we get is we do get actual examples from students' papers. And you can see that the lead examiner has gone through and has said that this one was given 2 for question 2. And it also talks about students, sort of the misconception. So it said a number of students failed to read the question and either listed internal users or offered people or institutions that were not really users. So that's really useful in terms of when you're giving feedback to students, especially if they're going to be resitting. So maybe they were in the summer 24 cohort and they're resitting. They can have a look at that, but it's also a misconception there that the students, you can see the students are either not reading the question properly in terms of business financial statements, or they're just not reading the whole question properly. So it's an activity you can do in class to teach them, look, slow down, what is the question stem saying, so that then they're going to be able to pick up the marks because they'll be able to recall the right information. As you can see here on the right, this has got an example of a good question, and then it's got an example of a question that hadn't performed quite as well. And then the lead examiner has explained why one has done well and one hasn't done quite so well. And you can see there that it said that most students were able to achieve 1 mark, but then obviously that means that not all students were able to achieve the 2. So it might be you have a look as a teaching team to see maybe what the misconception was there, what was going wrong, so that then when you're preparing your students, you've got that information. And obviously it's quite nice as a sort of be the examiner type task. So you could give them the second task there, you could give them the mark scheme, you could ask them to maybe identify why the second mark hadn't been awarded, or you could ask them to use their knowledge to then change the answer to make sure that it was achieving 4 marks. So you've got a range of different activities there that you could do, which helps students develop their exam skills as well. You can see there's another range of different types of questions that appear. So these are the calculation questions. So you can see on the left here, it's saying that it required them to calculate profit. Most were able to at least calculate the gross profit and get 1 mark, and many achieved it by then completing it. So you can see that that's indicating that there are some students who are maybe not getting to the final there, but they can definitely recall the formula. So it might be worth sort of looking through with students and having a go. And you can see there's an example then of a 4 marks answer. So maybe you could do an activity with students where you ask them to identify the steps of where those 2 marks might have been awarded, or because we know it's the right answer, you might go back to them and say, okay, have a look and see where you think if that answer had been wrong on the bottom line, where that answer might have been awarded in terms of the working out, so that they sort of start to understand why the working out is so important in calculation questions. And again, over here, you can see there's another calculation question. The student on this one achieved 2. They didn't achieve the full 3. So they got 1 mark for the formula and 1 mark for working out the contribution. So for this one, this would be a better one potentially if you were looking at a be the examiner task, because obviously they could go through and identify where those 2 marks came from, and then you could ask them to work out that final step to get the 3 marks. So you've got a range of different activities here. So you've got what good ones look like. If you're doing WAGOs, you've got activities on how to improve their exam technique. You've got activities on how to improve their knowledge. And it really lends itself quite nicely that the lead examiner reports on the core for these sorts of activities. You can see a section from the lead examiner report that starts to look at the longer response questions. So this is the final question, which is an extended open response question, which is a 12 marker. Now within the lead examiner report, there is more. I've just screenshot some of it so we could read it at least. And you're perfectly able to go away and have a look at these. These were the summer 24 ones. So you can go away and look at paper 1 or paper 2 and see what the full feedback was. But as you can see here, it says that students were asked to evaluate 2 options of either a new walking holiday or a targeted marketing campaign. And it says that the mean mark here achieved was 3 or 4 marks. And that means that they were awarded marks in mark band 1. So in terms of helping students to progress, if the average student is in mark band 1, that means that there's still potentially 8 additional marks that are available in terms of developing exam structure, developing their knowledge, that you can then work with them in class on. Now, this specific example here, you can see was a level 3 response. So this achieved 11 out of the 12 marks. So it might be with this specific one, you give it to students, you ask them to identify why it was 11. What would they have done for that last mark to get the 12 in there? And you can see the lead examiner report has said that they discussed both options. It's equally weighted, so it's got to be a balanced evaluation. If it's one-sided or the other, that will potentially affect their marks. And it also says that they've obviously considered both options there before making, on I think the next page that was in the lead examiner report, their judgment on which they should choose. So again, the lead examiner report lends itself nicely to considering that range of different activities to help prepare students for the core exam. There is another extended open response question. So this was 10H. So it was saying that for the level 3 responses, 9 to 12 marks, they were extremely rare. So on this specific question, in that 295 scripts that were seen, 9 was the highest score. So that left 3 marks there at the top that hadn't been attempted. So there's some room for growth there in terms of assessment strategy and improvement. And it said, though, the average response was a high end level 1. So again, similar to the last one we looked at, they're looking at it being 3 to 4 marks. So 2/3 of the marks are on average not being achieved on these extended open response. Now, again, that could be because it's about exam strategy and the structure of the questions. It might be that maybe they're not understanding how to read the stimulus material, the case studies and scenarios, and then extract the information they need. It might also be that it's an exam strategy problem where students are potentially just doing the paper from one and working their way through, and they're running out of time because they're spending time elsewhere. And you get to these big 12 mark extended open response questions, you just don't have time to finish them. So it might be that as a teacher, you sit down with your cohort and you look at other approaches to doing exam papers. So is it that they should go to the end of the paper and attempt the extended open response questions and work their way back? Is it that they need to develop a strategy in terms of time management, so they practice these questions enough that they know what 20 minutes feels like so they can move on? Is it that they start at the front, they hit the easy questions as they go through, but if they find one they can't answer really quickly, they keep going, do the essays and then go back? So there's a whole range of different ways that they can approach it, and that's another strategy that you can sort of teach them within the exam strategy of how can they do this so that they can achieve a higher outcome, especially on these extended open responses. Now, for this specific question, it said that the main reason that many were limited is because it was basic reasoning. So they'd gone with the increases in price will mean more revenue. Increase in price might put customers off. Reducing material costs might be the result of a reduction in quality. So as the lead examiner said there, whilst they're valid points, they were sort of making fanciful claims that weren't necessarily relevant. So what they were looking at here, so it says here things like many students seem to think that raising the price of a barbecue might cause widespread anger and destroy their reputation. Um, Raising a barbecue for £2 by £2.20 might, well, it depends on who the target market are, but it might not ruin their reputation. It might just be people are a little bit disgruntled, but they'll still buy it. People buy barbecues so frequently that any increase in price would be noticed. How many times are people buying barbecues? I mean, it might be those sorts of things. So it's about the realistic nature of the sorts of answers that students are giving. So when you go through the lead examiner report, you've got all of these sort of things, statements, judgments that are being made, and you can have a chat with your students about, look, let's not operate in absolutes. If you're going to say yes, it might be noticed. Don't say, oh, well, they're not going to buy it because it's gone up too much since last time, or consider this, is this a frequent purchase or is this a once in a blue moon type purchase? So there are all sorts of activities you can do that help students to really refine their exam technique. You can see here that the example that is in the lead examiner report, though, is the 9 marker. So only 1% of students achieved a 9 mark on this paper. So, and again, you can see there that it says that the spelling, the punctuation, the grammar are affected because of the pressure, but it's the content that matters in there. So you can go through with students, you've got a whole range of activities there that you can do with them in terms of helping them to understand how to better attempt these questions. End of the lead examiner report, there is also a summary. You can see here the summary for paper 1 and paper 2 from the core papers in the summer of 24. And in the summary, the lead examiner sort of sums up the information they found. So, for example, you can see there that time management is one of them, that maybe students were running out of time. You can see that they should be paying close attention to the wording of the question. So these are things that you could pull out as a team into an action plan, and then make sure that when you're working with your students, you're able to effect this into their strategy and their technique, and when you're practicing across the year. So, for example, you can see there one of the things that paper 2 is saying is that the responses in the extended open response questions need to be linked to the scenario. So it might be you do some more work around context, or it's also saying over here on paper 1 that for the 9 and 12 mark extended open response questions, students need to provide a fully weighted evaluation. So it might be that you spend some time looking at that as well. So they're really useful, the lead examiner reports, in a number of different ways that you can use them to help students improve their performance. Looked at the core papers, there's also one for the employer set project. So here you can see the introduction of the employer set projects for the summer of 2024 lead examiner report. And again, it's got the same layout. It's talking about how it was set out, what the expectations were, what the tasks were, and it also talked about where students were struggling as well. And again, sort of I've screenshot some key components of the lead examiner report, because for the employer set projects, it's slightly different to the core exam. So where on the core exam you can get lots of little ones, there's only 5 tasks here. So the tasks tend to be a lot longer, and they have reproduced whole tasks in the lead examiner report. So as you can see here, you've got the first half of the task. So the lead examiner has talked through what the students were asked to do, what they were given, and then on the right there you can see where the part of the task they would get that the students did themselves, and then the lead examiner has continued and it's talking about those sorts of things. So in the lead examiner report itself, there is a lot more information for the specific tasks. There is a lot more evidence. And again, it's not quite as easy maybe to use for what a good one looks like, or be the examiner, or any other sort of assessment activity that you're doing. But they are great in terms of showing students, look, this is a, I don't know, 6 mark. This is a 10 mark. This is what this example looks like, so that they know when they're looking at it what they're going to have to do. Because often students' biggest problem when they're looking at new types of assessment is they don't know what depth or type of work they need to produce. So even though this is slightly different to the core papers, you can maybe delete all the information around it if you were to export the PDF into a Word document, and you could just share the student responses here with the students and get rid of all of the commentary, and then have a conversation with them around that. They can have a look at what this looks like and how it feels, and whether they feel they're confident to produce something similar or better, and you can have that discussion with them to prepare them. As the core papers, the lead examiner report for the employer set project finishes with a summary of all the things that they're recommending that students should focus on. So for the summer 2024 paper, you can see they were recommending that they practice calculation of a percentage change, that they're allowing sufficient time to write up the plan because a lot of those were unfinished, that presentations were not just copy and paste, but when they're developing presentations, students are selecting important information to put on the screen and then sharing it elsewhere. The speaker's notes should extend the detail offered in the slides. So the slides maybe are highlights, and then the speaker's notes should be the full writing. You can also see you've got things like producing a summary. So there's lots of different things here that you can use in your planning, your delivery, your assessment to help your students to really achieve well and understand what it is that each of those tasks in the employer set projects are that they need to be doing. So an activity you could be doing with your team, maybe at the start of the year if you've got planning and assessment time, or maybe through meetings if you've got them throughout the calendar year, is thinking about what are the key things on these examiner reports that you can use, and they are available for each of the assessments. So core paper 1, core paper 2, employer set project, and occupational specialism. So it doesn't matter if they're only teaching occupational specialism or if they're only teaching the core exams, they've all got lead examiner reports, they've all got the same introduction, they've all got the same sort of conclusion and summary. They've all got the misconceptions identified in there. So it could be that you create an action plan for each of these assessments, or develop a skills program, for example, and that you as a team develop those. It might be you want to do it as maybe an onboarding, an induction week. It might be you want to do it as like an exam skills session. But there's lots of activities that you can pull out of these lead examiner reports. There's also examples that you can use if you need to put them on the wall, and things like that. So it's worth having a consideration of how could you actually use these lead examiner reports other than having a quick look at how the cohort did, to make sure that you're really supporting your learners to achieve. Thank you for listening to this bite-sized session on understanding the lead examiner reports for the core. Hopefully it's been useful.